We are now going to follow a game that goes through the Giuoco piano chess opening. This game was played in 1984 between Grandmaster Short and Chessmaster Malaniuk Vladimir, two very top-level chess players, so it is a high-quality game. I wanted to show you a game played by some of the best players. In fact, Nigel Short, who is playing the black side in this game, almost became world champion. He was one of the best players in the world at one point in time. Alright, so now we see e4, e5, and this is very familiar to us. The moves are a little bit out of order, but we reach the exact same position that we'd had at move 7. After this, white plays a little bit differently than the way that I showed you, but it's good to be exposed to new ideas and to learn from them. And the moves that white plays are also really good moves, so you could play them as well. White plays knight a4 and deviates. In this position, we had actually played rook out to e1 and prepared to play bishop to e3. Instead, white plays knight a4, and this is a really good idea. The idea here is to trade the knight for the bishop at some point. Remember that the f2 pawn is the greatest weakness in the kingside pawn structure, so thereby getting rid of this bishop would reduce pressure on the f2 pawn and therefore make it harder for black to attack white's kingside. So therefore it makes sense to help protect the king a little bit more by trading off that bishop. Alright, now we see c3, building up in the center, planning on grabbing more central space with a d4 pawn thrust. Now white cannot do that right away, because if he does that, then it'll leave this pawn unprotected. So white must first protect the e4 pawn a second time, and then push his pawn to d4. And as you're going to see here, that is exactly what he does. He brings the bishop back to give more support to the e4 pawn before expanding in the center to grab more space. Now the funny thing is that both players had the same idea and expanded in the center at the exact same time. Alright, so after knight takes e4, white snaps up the bishop and then captures on e5. And we still have equal central control. So it's all good. The pawns just kind of danced around each other and changed positions a little bit. Now black plays f6, which is a great idea to try and take away some of white's central control. White captures, queen takes f6, bishop e3. Good move, trying to make up for the lack of a pawn in the center by guarding this important d4 square. Now this pawn is not in the center, but is able to have some central control, so white still has a good central control here. And then bishop f7, knight d2, and the idea here is to trade the knight for the other knight and thereby weaken black's central control, trying to reduce some of the tension in the center. So rook a to d8, a nice exchange, and now queen out to g4, double attacking this pawn. Now black defends in a very clever way. He plays the rook out to e5, and at first it doesn't look like it defends, because it looks like that white could just simply capture the pawn with his bishop, because black is only attacking the bishop one time, and white's defending it. So it looks like that white could just win the pawn. But now comes bishop h5, and as we can see here, the queen is under attack and is therefore no longer able to defend the bishop, and that allows black to win material and therefore win the game. So we don't want to allow that to happen. Therefore, white decides to chase away the rook so that the bishop on h5 would not have the protection of the rook, and then white can continue to attack the pawn in other ways. Queen out to g3, bishop c4, and rook f to e1, attacking the pawn once again. Now black counterattacks, which is really good. He lines up on white's bishop, and the bishop is worth more than the pawn, so therefore white must protect the bishop. This is a really good technique to use when you are attacked. Simply counterattack something of greater value, and your opponent will be forced to defend it. So he has to move the bishop, and then black can defend his pawn, bishop to d3. The game continues with check, attacking the king, so it runs to the corner. And then white brings his other rook into the game, and that is a great move. The rook should be placed on open files or semi-open files so that they have more space. But what I mean by an open file is I mean a file without pawns on it, or with maybe just one pawn on it. So for instance, this file has only one pawn on it, so therefore black's rook is able to control a lot of space. And if this bishop were not here, then the rook would be controlling a lot of space down this file. So it's a very good move. Queen f5, few more moves being played, and queen out to g4. Now this concept is a little bit more complicated. White wants to trade off the queens and go into the endgame. The reason here is that the e4 pawn is an isolated pawn, and therefore a huge weakness. It's a target because it cannot be defended by any other pawns. The only pieces that can defend it are the rooks, the knights, and the bishops, and so it ties down black's army to defending that pawn. So therefore, without the powerful queen on the board, it will be much harder for black to counterattack, and it will be much easier for white to attack the pawn. Therefore, white trades off the queens. And this is another tactic. It's called a hanging piece. The pawn cannot capture on f3 because it would leave the bishop hanging. The pawn is currently defending the bishop, and if it takes on f3, then white can simply capture the bishop and win the game. So therefore, white's pawn is immune to capture. It cannot be captured. Knight a5, going after the bishop, and bishop g8 check. Remember our discussion about back rank checkmates? It is a good thing that the black king has an escape route, otherwise he would have been checkmated on the back rank. Now bishop out to c1, making use of another tactic called the pin, pinning the bishop to the rook. Now what white's plan is to play his other rook back to d4, double attack the bishop, and win it. Let's see what happens if white is able to do that. Yes, black can try to defend the bishop with his other rook, but then white can simply attack the rook again, and if the rook moves back, then the other bishop attacks it. So if the rook were to move away and to a safe square, then the bishop is able to be captured. So that is white's plan here, is to win that piece. Therefore, black plays this great move, knight to c6, attacking the rook and preventing it from being able to move to d4. So therefore it guards the bishop. In addition to that, the knight also is defending the rook, so it allows for his bishop to move. Therefore the bishop is no longer pinned, because the rook is defended. And there we have it. The bishop is now able to move back. A pair of rooks are traded off. And, well, there's just very little material left on the board. So here, with equal material and very few pieces left, the players agreed to a draw.